There is a material that insulates 5 times more effectively per inch than the pink fiberglass bats stuffed inside the walls of virtually every American home built in the last 60 years. It is completely fireproof without chemical treatment. It does not irritate your lungs, your skin, or your eyes during installation. It does not settle, compress, or lose R value over time the way fiberglass does. It manages moisture vapor naturally, preventing the mold growth that fiberglass installation actively encourages by trapping humidity against wall cavities with no breathability whatsoever. It has been used as a building insulation material for over a century across Europe, Japan, and Scandinavia. And a bag sufficient to insulate an average wall cavity costs $28 at an agricultural supply store that your hardware store has been quietly competing against for decades. The material is sheep's wool. Raw, minimally processed, agricultural-grade sheep's wool. And the $60 billion fiberglass insulation industry, dominated by 3 companies that have controlled North American residential insulation specification since the 1950s, has spent the better part of a century making sure that wool never appeared in a single building code, contractor training guide, or home improvement television segment as a credible alternative to the synthetic product they manufacture, patent, and sell on a replacement cycle that wool's performance characteristics make completely unnecessary. This is the story of the insulation material that outperforms fiberglass on every thermal, moisture, and air quality metric that matters inside a home. And the industry that quietly made sure you never learned its name. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of knowledge that textbooks quietly stopped teaching and corporations quietly stopped mentioning, hit the like button and subscribe to Lost Tech Vault right now. Every vault we open here costs someone powerful a great deal of money to keep shut. Make sure you never miss the next one we crack open. To understand why wool insulation outperforms fiberglass, you need to understand what insulation is actually doing inside a wall cavity, because the answer is more complex than the R value number printed on a fiberglass bat suggests. R value measures resistance to conductive heat transfer through a material under controlled laboratory conditions. Dry conditions, stable temperature, no air movement, no moisture. The precise conditions that exist inside a wall cavity for approximately 0% of the time that wall is exposed to real weather across a real building's lifetime. Fiberglass achieves its laboratory R value through a simple mechanism. Millions of tiny glass fibers trap still air, and still air is a poor conductor of heat. That mechanism works perfectly in a laboratory. In a real wall cavity, it encounters 2 problems that the industry's R-value marketing has spent decades ensuring you never think about. The first is moisture. Fiberglass is hygroscopic. It absorbs and holds water vapor from the air moving through wall cavities. A fiberglass bat at 20% moisture content by weight loses approximately 40% of its labeled R value. Not 5%, not 10%, 40%. A wall labeled R19 that gets damp in its first winter is performing at R11 or lower within months of installation, and the homeowner has no way of knowing because the performance loss is invisible behind the drywall. The second is AR movement. Fiberglass bats do not stop air, they slow it. In any wall cavity with imperfect vapor barrier installation, which describes the overwhelming majority of real-world residential construction, air movement through the insulation layer carries heat with it at a rate that makes the conductive resistance the R value measures almost irrelevant. Studies from Oak Ridge National Laboratory documented that real-world fiberglass insulation in residential walls performs at 40 to 60% of its labeled R value under actual field conditions, accounting for moisture and air infiltration. The $60 billion industry selling you R19 knows you are getting R11. They wrote the rating standard that lets them label it R19 anyway. Sheep's wool fiber does something that no synthetic insulation material on the market replicates. It actively manages moisture rather than passively resisting or absorbing it. The structure of a wool fiber at the microscopic level is a cortical cell surrounded by overlapping scale cells, the same structure that makes wool feel slightly rough and gives it its characteristic crimp. That crimp creates an enormous surface area within a small volume, trapping still air with exceptional efficiency. But the cortical cells beneath the scales are hydrophilic. They absorb moisture vapor from the surrounding air and chemically bind it within the fiber structure, releasing it slowly back into the air as conditions change. A wool fiber can absorb up to 35% of its own weight in moisture vapor without feeling wet and without any degradation of its thermal performance. Where fiberglass loses 40% of R value at 20% moisture content, wool at the same moisture level loses essentially nothing because the moisture is chemically bound inside the fiber rather than filling the air pockets. The insulation depends on for its thermal performance. This moisture buffering does something structurally important that goes beyond thermal performance. It prevents the conditions that drive mold growth inside wall cavities. Mold requires free moisture, water vapor that has condensed onto a surface and is available as liquid. Wool absorbs that vapor before condensation occurs, preventing the moisture accumulation that fiberglass insulated walls experience chronically in every climate with meaningful humidity variation across seasons. Builders in Scandinavia and the United Kingdom who have been specifying wool insulation for decades document virtually zero mold remediation in wool insulated structures compared to industry average rates in fiberglass construction. The fireproofing story is where wool's advantage over fiberglass becomes almost difficult to believe without reading the testing data directly. Fiberglass does not burn, which the industry promotes as a fire safety advantage. What the industry does not prominently discuss is that fiberglass melts at temperatures commonly reached in residential structure fires, losing its physical form and its insulating functions simultaneously, and that the synthetic binders and backing materials used in standard fiberglass batt products release toxic combustion gases when exposed to fire conditions. Wool does not melt, it chars. The chemical composition of wool fiber, high nitrogen and sulfur content, makes it naturally self-extinguishing when a flame source is removed. It does not require chemical fire retardant treatment to meet residential building fire codes. It achieves fire resistance through its own molecular structure, the same molecular structure that has been making wool a natural fiber for millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Independent fire testing at certified laboratories in the United Kingdom and Australia has documented wool insulation meeting and exceeding residential fire code requirements without any chemical addition whatsoever. Fiberglass meets those same codes through a combination of its melting point and the fire retardant treatments applied to its facing materials. The chemistry that makes fiberglass fire code compliant is doing work that wool's own biology handles without any industrial intervention. The reason wool insulation disappeared from North American residential construction between 1950 and 1970 is not complicated once you understand who was writing the specifications. Owens Corning filed the original patents on residential fiberglass insulation in the 1930s. By the post-war housing boom of the 1950s, they had established fiberglass as the default specification in residential building codes through a combination of industry lobbying, contractor incentive programs, and the simple economic reality that fiberglass could be manufactured at industrial scale and wool could not be controlled, patented, or supplied exclusively by any single corporation. Wool grows on sheep. Sheep grow on farms. The supply chain is distributed across millions of independent agricultural producers on every inhabited continent. You cannot corner a wool market the way you can corner a synthetic fiber manufacturing market. You cannot create proprietary formulations of wool. You cannot build a $60 billion industry around a material that any sheep farmer can produce without your permission. So the building codes were written around fiberglass specifications. The contractor training programs taught fiberglass installation. The home improvement retail channel stocked fiberglass because Owens Corning, Johns Manville, and CertainTeed had the distribution relationships, the marketing budgets, and the industry standard certifications that agricultural wool suppliers did not. And 3 generations of American homeowners insulated their walls with a product that Oak Ridge National Laboratory documented performing at half its labeled value under real conditions, while a better solution sat in agricultural supply stores for $28 a bag. European builders never fully abandoned wool. In the United Kingdom, Ireland, New Zealand, and Scandinavia, wool insulation has maintained consistent market presence precisely because the fiberglass industry's control over building code specification was never as complete as it became in North America. The performance data from those markets is publicly available. Decades of real-world installation across diverse climate conditions. Documented moisture management performance, documented fire safety, documented thermal performance under actual field conditions rather than laboratory testing protocols designed by the industry whose products they measure. The wool is still growing, the sheep are still grazing, the agricultural supply stores still stock it for $28 a bag. And the Oak Ridge National Laboratory data documenting what fiberglass actually delivers inside a real wall is publicly archived and available to anyone willing to compare it against the R-value number printed on the label. Your walls are not supposed to lose 40% of their insulating value the first winter they get damp. The building industry just needed them to. Subscribe to Lost Tech Vault. Share this with someone insulating a home with a product that performs at half its label, while a $28 bag of wool sits on a shelf at the agricultural supply store down the road. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside it is heavier than this one.